Racist judge sentences black mother to life in prison, unaware. Her husband is the mayor. The courthouse towered under the gray morning sky, its cold stone pillars casting long shadows of judgment. Angela Reed, a 36-year-old black mother of three, climbed the steps slowly, her back straight but heart heavy. Dressed in her Sunday navy dress, now more armor than clothing, she gripped a worn photo of her children, Jasmine, Tyler, and Caleb. Beside her, Brent Callahan, her anxious court-appointed lawyer, whispered legal terms that did little to ease her fear. Inside, courtroom 2B felt colder than the outside air. The sterile walls and flickering fluorescent lights seemed designed not just to judge, but to break the spirit. Angela sat at the defense table, her fingers clenched tightly in her lap. The prosecution, an overzealous young assistant DA with slicked back hair and an air of practiced arrogance, stood ready with his file of accusations. He barely glanced at her. To him, she was already guilty. "All rise," the bailiff barked. The courtroom stood in perfect unison as Judge Gregory Hartman entered. He was a tall, ghostly figure in a long black robe that trailed behind him like the shadow of something ancient and cruel. His eyes, a pale, steely blue, scanned the room without warmth, without curiosity. Just a flat, merciless gaze that seemed to weigh not guilt, but value. And in his gaze, Angela was worth nothing. "Be seated," he said, and his voice cracked like dry ice. The proceedings began. The prosecutor wasted no time painting Angela as negligent at best, deceptive at worst. He held up the unlabeled pill bottle like it was a loaded weapon. "Found in the glove compartment," he declared. "No label, no prescription, a textbook violation of state narcotics law." Brent Callahan fumbled to his feet. "Your Honor," he began, voice wavering, "Ms. Reed has never had a criminal record. She works 2 jobs, supports her family alone. The pills in question belong to her elderly mother, who suffers from severe hypertension. It was an honest mistake. She was simply transporting them after a shift." Hartman didn't blink. He didn't write anything down. He simply stared. Angela stood, voice firm despite the knot in her throat. "Your Honor, I know I should have kept the label, but those pills, they're the only thing keeping my mom alive. I worked a double shift that night. I was rushing to bring them home, that's all. Please, my children need me. They're all I have, and I'm all they have." The courtroom was silent. Even the gallery, half filled with interns, clerks, and other waiting defendants, felt the weight of her words. Her honesty, her exhaustion, her humanity hung in the air, like a breath waiting to be released. But Judge Hartman remained stone. A long pause. Then he removed his glasses and wiped them with a silk handkerchief, slow and meticulous, like a ritual. When he finally looked back up, his voice was quiet, but sharp enough to slice the air. "This court," he said, "has grown weary of excuses wrapped in emotional appeals." He leaned forward slightly. "You may claim to be a mother, a daughter, even a victim of circumstance. But you are, before this court, a violator of the law. This country is drowning in leniency. If people like you continue to believe that hardship excuses crime, we will cease to be a nation of order." Angela's knees almost buckled. Hartman continued, his tone rising. "Therefore, in accordance with the guidelines of this court, and in consideration of your disregard for proper pharmaceutical procedures, I hereby sentence you to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The gavel slammed. Gasps broke out across the room. Callahan stood in disbelief. "Your Honor, that's unheard of. The maximum penalty for this offense—" "Sit down, Mr. Callahan," Hartman interrupted, voice suddenly thunderous. "Another word and you will be held in contempt." Angela stood frozen, her breath gone. The world blurred around her. She barely felt the bailiff approaching. She barely registered the click of handcuffs locking around her wrists. Her shoulders slumped under the crushing weight of injustice. She had expected hardship, maybe probation, maybe community service. But this? Life? Tears broke free from her eyes as the reality slammed into her chest like a freight train. Her children, her babies, waiting at home for dinner, waiting for her to come back. What would she tell them? How could she? Her voice cracked in a final desperate whisper. "Please, someone call their school." "Jasmine," She has choir practice today. The courtroom remained silent. The young prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. Even he looked rattled now, the fire drained from his smug expression. The judge stood and exited, robe trailing behind him like a black wave consuming the room. He didn't look back. Angela was led out through a side door, flanked by two officers. Her head hung low. Her tears now flowed freely, unchecked. She didn't resist. She didn't fight. What was the point? From the gallery, a young law student scribbled notes furiously, her hand trembling. She had come to observe judicial proceedings. Instead, she had witnessed a quiet execution. Outside the courthouse, clouds gathered. Inside, justice had just died. And no one, not even the law, lifted a finger to save it. The newsroom alert hit every major channel just after noon. Local mother sentenced to life in controversial drug case. And within minutes, it was everywhere. TVs in diners, offices, waiting rooms, and gas stations flickered with Angela Reed's tear-streaked face as she was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. No context, no explanation. Just a quiet, shattering image of injustice. For most, it was a tragic headline. But for one man, it was a lightning strike to the soul. Inside the sleek office on the top floor of City Hall, Mayor Ethan Reed sat reviewing budget proposals, unaware that his entire life was about to implode. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting warm rays over polished mahogany and pristine white papers. Everything felt calm until the screen behind his desk buzzed to life. Breaking news out of the county courthouse today. Ethan turned absently toward the monitor, coffee mug in hand, his eyes casually glancing at the broadcast. And then he froze. The image on screen wasn't just news, it was personal. Angela, her face pale with disbelief, her wrists shackled, her body trembling as a uniformed officer led her away. For a second, time didn't move. Then the ceramic mug slipped from his hand and shattered against the hardwood floor. The coffee stains spread like blood. Ethan stood up, breath caught in his chest. He stared at the screen, unable to process the image in front of him. Words echoed from the broadcast. Life sentence. Possession of unmarked prescription pills. Judge Hartman's ruling. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, drowning out the rest. The reporter continued. In what many are already calling an excessive sentence, Angela Reed, a mother of three, was given life in prison this morning in what should have been a minor possession charge. Critics are raising questions about Judge Hartman's history of sentencing minority defendants more harshly than white counterparts. Ethan's fists clenched. He hadn't even known Angela had been arrested. She hadn't told him. Of course she hadn't. They had agreed years ago for the safety of their children, their careers, their peace, that their marriage would remain private. No photos, no press releases, not even a joint holiday card. Just stolen weekends at the lake house. Separate addresses during the week. Parallel lives held together by love and secrecy. But now that secrecy had become a cage. He yanked open the drawer in his desk and pulled out a small, worn photo, one no one had ever seen. It showed Angela and their three kids laughing on the beach, their footprints scattered in the sand behind them. She had always hated politics, hated how it swallowed people whole. That's why they kept her life separate, to protect her, to protect them. But this was the opposite of protection. A knock rattled his door. Tom, his chief of staff, poked his head in, face pale. Sir, have you seen? I saw, Ethan cut him off, voice low and seething. Cancel everything. No meetings, no press calls, not a single handshake today. Tom hesitated. Do you want me to find out more about the case? I want Rachel Chen, my lawyer, on the phone, now. His voice cracked like a whip. Tell her it's urgent. As Tom disappeared down the hall, Ethan paced like a caged lion, his hands trembling, his mind racing. How long had she been in jail? Why didn't she call him? Why didn't anyone call him? But he knew the answer. She was trying to protect him, even as the system crushed her. She must have thought it was minor, a misunderstanding, something a public defender could smooth over. He probably never imagined Judge Hartman would bring down the full weight of the law on her shoulders. But Hartman had, And now Angela was behind bars because she dared carry her mother's blood pressure medication in the wrong bottle. And because she was black, the injustice wasn't just legal, it was personal. He stared at the screen again. Her face, still etched with shock and disbelief, flickered before fading into a segment about rising gas prices. As if her life sentence were just another passing story, but not to him, not to their children, and not to the city that would soon learn the truth. Because Ethan Reed had spent his career avoiding scandal, avoiding exposure, but now none of that mattered. Now he was a husband, and his wife had just been buried alive by the justice system. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and snatched the landline from his desk, bypassing every protocol, every layer of staff and assistant. There was no time. He didn't want strategy. He didn't want delay. He wanted action. He dialed a direct number he hadn't used in years. 1 ring, 2. Then a sharp, confident voice answered, "Alvarez." Sophia Alvarez, former federal prosecutor, now one of the most feared legal minds in the state, sharp as a blade, with a reputation for tearing corrupt judges apart in hearings like a surgeon with a scalpel. If anyone could help him take down Judge Hartman, it was her. "Sophia, it's Ethan Reed." There was a pause. "Mayor Reed?" Her voice dropped, cautious. "This must be serious if you're calling me personally." "It's worse than serious," he said, his throat tightening. "It's my wife." Silence. Then, "Go on." "She was just sentenced to life in prison this morning for carrying her mother's medication in an unmarked bottle. No prior record, no intent to distribute. Judge Hartman presided." Sophia's breath caught on the other end. "Hartman? That bastard's still handing out sentences like he's God." "She didn't even tell me she'd been arrested," Ethan continued, pacing the room. "She knew it would hurt my career if it came out. So she went alone, trusted the system. And now, she's in prison, Sophia." "Angela Reed," Sophia said, already typing. "I saw the name on the news. I didn't know." "Ethan, my God." "No one does," he replied, voice low. "No one knows she's my wife." He paused, the weight of that truth choking him. Years of secrecy, years of hiding their marriage for the sake of political safety. All of it now felt like a betrayal, not of the public, but of her. "I need your help," he said. "We need to take Hartman apart, from the inside out, whatever it takes." "You've come to the right place," Sophia said, her tone darkening. "But if we're going to war, I need full access. I need everything. Her case file, Hartman's sentencing records, transcripts, every ounce of dirt. And Ethan, you can't keep your name out of this anymore. If we're going public, you need to stand next to her, not behind." Ethan stopped pacing. He looked at the framed photograph on his desk, one he always kept face down. A candid shot from years ago at the lake house. Angela laughing, barefoot, holding a sparkler in one hand, while Tyler clung to her leg. The kids had been so small then, free, safe. Sophia's voice cut through the silence. "You've spent a decade protecting your image, but protecting your image won't bring your wife home." And she was right. Ethan turned back to the window, staring out over the city he had spent his life serving. It looked the same, but everything had changed. Angela had walked into that courtroom alone because she believed in his mission, because they'd promised each other, "We keep the family private so the cause stays clean." But now the cause was broken, corrupted by a judge who wore his robe like armor and used his gavel like a weapon. Hartman hadn't just attacked Angela, he'd attacked everything Ethan believed in. "I'll go public," Ethan said finally, voice steel. "We've hidden long enough." Sophia didn't hesitate. "Then let's make sure when you step in front of that podium, you do it holding a sword." "I want you digging into Hartman tonight," Ethan ordered. "I want patterns. I want numbers. I want to know every black, brown, or poor defendant he's railroaded in the last 10 years. I want this man's entire career burned to the ground by sunrise." "You'll have it," Sophia promised. "And Ethan, thank you for doing the right thing, even if it costs you everything." He hung up the phone slowly, the adrenaline in his blood now hardening into resolve. Then he turned to his chief of staff, who had re-entered the room, nervously clutching a tablet. "Tom, draft a press statement. No spin, no politics, just the truth. I want the people to hear it straight from me. Angela Reed is my wife. She has been wrongfully convicted, and I won't rest until justice is done. The conference room on the 12th floor of City Hall had never felt so alive or so dangerous. It was after midnight, but the air buzzed with adrenaline. The lights were harsh, fluorescent, sterile. On the massive oak table, laptops flickered, manila folders piled high, and a sea of printed court records spilled like damning confessions across the polished surface. Mayor Ethan Reed stood at one end of the table, sleeves rolled up, tie discarded, hands planted on the edge as he stared down at the growing mountain of evidence. Across from him sat Sofia Alvarez, the city's most formidable legal strategist. Her eyes moved fast, scanning pages, highlighting key names, circling patterns with surgical precision. Neither of them had eaten. Neither of them cared. They weren't here to rest. They were here to bring a system to its knees. I've run the numbers 3 times, Sophia said, her voice low, clipped, focused. She pushed a thick folder across the table. 5 years, 214 felony cases presided over by Judge Gregory Hartman. Ethan opened the file. Charts, names, sentences, demographics. 80% of harsh sentences, she continued, went to black and brown defendants. For identical or lesser charges than white defendants received probation or fines. That's not just disparity, Ethan. That's institutional violence in a robe. Ethan's jaw tensed. And no one said anything? People tried, Sophia said, flipping to a handwritten complaint buried in an old file. But every time someone pushed back, it vanished, buried under judicial discretion. She pulled out another sheet, a sealed disciplinary report, never followed up. A defense attorney once filed a formal objection after Hartman mocked her Hispanic client's accent in open court. The complaint? Closed. No action taken. The further they dug, the darker it became. One after another, the files exposed a pattern of blatant racial bias. Longer sentences for people of color, condescending comments in transcripts, evidence of Hartman overriding jury recommendations. And then they found the letter. Sophia held it up, eyes narrowing. This is where the real storm begins. It was an old scanned document, dated nearly 30 years ago, buried in a dusty law journal archive. A signed opinion piece by Gregory Hartman, then a young legal associate. The headline read, "Preserving the Integrity of Traditional Education, a Case Against Forced Integration." Ethan took the paper, eyes narrowing as he read the words. Hartman had argued eloquently, but unmistakably, that homogeneous learning environments allow for stronger cultural unity, and that preserving traditional white academic institutions ensures educational excellence. It was cloaked in academic language, but the message was clear. Segregation by another name. Sophia dropped a second file onto the table. Guess who sponsored the article? Ethan opened it and froze. The American Heritage Order, a defunct organization once listed by civil rights groups as a white nationalist legal think tank. Jesus Christ, he muttered. It gets worse. Sophia clicked on her laptop, pulling up a digitized yearbook from 1991. She zoomed in on a black and white photo. Hartman, mid-20s, wearing a blazer, standing next to a sign that read, "Tradition over Tolerance," smiling proudly. He had been a board member of a fraternity known for racially charged initiations. How has this man been a judge for 15 years? Ethan whispered. Because no one ever shined a light this bright, Sophia said. Until now. A tense silence hung between them. The weight of what they'd uncovered felt like dynamite, volatile, undeniable, and powerful enough to blow the doors off the courthouse. Then Ethan spoke, his voice low and steady. We take this public. We burn down the walls protecting this man. Sophia met his eyes. This isn't just about Angela anymore. I know, he said. It's about every mother, every father, every kid who sat in that courtroom thinking the system would treat them fairly, only to watch their future vanish with a bang of his gavel. Sophia nodded once, then reached for her phone. I'll send everything to Rachel Chen. She needs to prep her team for a full-scale judicial misconduct case. As she typed, Ethan walked to the massive window overlooking the city. The streets below were quiet, but his city was on the edge of something massive. And when the truth came out, it would erupt. And that eruption began before dawn. The next morning, a leak hit social media. A screenshot of Hartman's old article with his name circled in red, then the yearbook photo, then sentencing charts. Someone, no one knew who, had taken the files and dropped them into the public domain. It spread like wildfire. By 9 a.m., Expose Hartman and Justice for Angela were trending nationally. By 10:30 a.m., the Chronicle Tribune ran a full feature. The Judge Behind the Robe, a deep dive into Hartman's disturbing past. Inside the article were images from court records, anonymous testimonies from defense attorneys, and quotes from civil rights advocates demanding Hartman's removal. Protests sparked outside the courthouse. Peaceful but furious. Signs held high. "We trusted you. You betrayed us. Angela is all of us. Bias is not justice." Outside City Hall, a woman in scrubs stood with her 2 children, holding a sign that read, "That could have been my mother." Meanwhile, reporters swarmed Hartman's chambers, demanding a response. The judge refused to appear. His office remained silent, but silence only fueled the fire. That afternoon, Ethan held an emergency meeting with his senior staff in the district attorney's office. Inside the room, documents were pinned to every wall. Hartman's connections, photos, legal opinions. Rachel Chen stood near the center, arms crossed, scanning the evidence. "This isn't just enough to open a misconduct investigation," she said. "It's enough to put him on trial." Ethan didn't blink. "Then let's do it." That night, he drafted the statement he never thought he'd have to write. In it, he named names. He cited statistics. He confirmed Angela was his wife, and that her case was the spark that exposed a rotting branch of the city's justice system. He ended it with one line: "Justice cannot exist where bias is allowed to thrive." It ends now. By sunrise, every major outlet in the country had picked up the story. The dam had broken, and behind it, a tidal wave of long-buried truth was crashing forward, ready to drown the old system in light. Angela Reed had never known silence like this. It wasn't the kind that brought peace. It was the kind that scraped against your soul like broken glass. The kind that echoed off concrete walls and metal bars, hollow and relentless, like a cruel lullaby sung by the system meant to break you. Her cell was small, barely wide enough to stretch her arms. The mattress was thin and lumpy, pressing her bones into the cold steel frame every night. Her pillow was no thicker than a folded towel. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed constantly, flickering every few seconds like they, too, were on the verge of giving up. She hadn't seen the sky in 4 days. Angela sat hunched on the edge of her cot, elbows on her knees, fingers tangled in her hair. Her navy blue dress, the one she had worn with pride to court, was now stained, wrinkled, and damp with the sweat of fear. It still carried the scent of her youngest son's hug that morning before she was taken. Baby powder, peanut butter, and the warm scent of home. That was a lifetime ago now. Each hour dragged like molasses. Meals were served with mechanical indifference. Guards spoke in clipped commands. The other inmates kept to themselves, not out of cruelty, but out of survival. No one wanted to attach themselves to someone who looked as broken as Angela did. She hadn't cried since the sentence. The tears had come in the courtroom, quietly, helplessly. Now she was past tears. What lived inside her now was colder, heavier, despair, the kind that sunk into her bones and made her question if she'd ever feel sunlight again. Then on the 5th morning, just after roll call, when she sat in the corner of the recreation room staring blankly at a crack in the floor, one of the guards approached with a yellow envelope. "Mail," he grunted, tossing it onto her lap. Angela blinked. Mail? She hadn't expected any. No one even knew she was here. She turned the envelope over and gasped. It was covered in stickers, rainbows, hearts. One smudged corner had a tiny paw print drawn in pencil. And in the middle, scrawled in uneven handwriting with purple marker, were the words, "To Mommy," from Jasmine, Tyler, and Caleb. Her breath caught. Hands shaking, she tore the envelope open and pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper. The first page was covered in crayon drawings, stick figures of the kids holding hands with her, standing in front of their tiny house. A big sun smiled down at them, and the words, "We love you," floated in clouds above their heads. Angela's vision blurred. She turned the page and found a letter, clearly written by her eldest Jasmine, just 13 but suddenly forced to carry the weight of a world far too cruel for someone her age. Dear Mommy, we miss you. We don't know why they won't let you come home. I told Caleb and Tyler it was just a misunderstanding, like when the neighbor's dog got loose and everyone was mad. But then they forgave him. Caleb asked if you did something bad and I said no. You just love people too much. Tyler cried when he saw your picture on the TV. He tried to hug the screen. He doesn't understand. I said you were helping people even in jail. That's what heroes do. Grandma is trying her best, but she's tired. Her back hurts when she picks Caleb up. Grandpa sometimes forgets to give Tyler his allergy meds. I help with homework and cook dinner when I can, but the stove is scary. I miss your singing at bedtime. I miss your pancakes. I miss your laugh. Please come home soon, Mommy. We need you. I need you. Love always, your Jasmine. Angela didn't realize she was sobbing until her hands began to shake violently, the paper crumpling between her fingers. She curled around the letter, folding into herself as if trying to protect the words from the harshness of the world around her. This was the soundless scream of a mother robbed of her children. Every second she remained here, her daughter was being forced to grow up too fast. Her sons were sleeping without kisses goodnight. Her parents, elderly, struggling, were trying to hold together a life they had no strength left to carry. And she had been thrown in this cage for a bottle of heart medication, her mother's pills, unlabeled, found in her glove box after a routine traffic stop. No prior record, no history of drug abuse, no malice. Only a black woman, alone, standing in front of a white-robed judge with no mercy in his eyes. And that had been enough. Angela's despair began to shift, slowly, painfully, into something else. Fire. It started as a flicker, a tiny ember in the pit of her chest. It didn't burn yet, but it glowed, warm, alive. It reminded her of the light in Jasmine's eyes when she sang in the church choir, of Tyler's uncontrollable laughter during movie nights, of Caleb's tiny hand gripping hers at the grocery store. They hadn't taken her love. They hadn't taken her memory. They hadn't taken her will. She unfolded the letter again and stared at Jasmine's final words. I need you. Angela sat up straighter. Her back hurt. Her arms ached. But she felt taller. She pressed the letter to her heart, then stood and walked back to her cell. As she sat on the cot, she stared at the cracked ceiling above her. She didn't know how long it would take. She didn't know who would help. But she made herself a promise, right there in the silence. She would survive. She would outlast this place. And when the world finally opened its eyes to the injustice that brought her here, she would be ready. That night, while the rest of the prison slept, Angela wrote back. She borrowed a pen from a quiet cellmate and asked the guard for extra paper. In crooked handwriting, she poured everything she had into that letter. She told Jasmine how proud she was, how strong she was, how beautiful her voice was when she sang, how much she believed that no matter how dark it seemed now, they would be together again. She ended with a promise. I will come home. You hear me, baby? I will. And when I do, I'm never letting go again. In a house miles away, Jasmine tucked her brothers into bed and stared at the empty chair across the dinner table. She didn't know when Mommy would write back. She didn't know if Mommy could, but she believed, because sometimes belief is all a child has, and in a cell filled with shadows, that belief was enough to keep a mother breathing, fighting, surviving, waiting for justice. The fight for justice is just beginning. More shocking twists are ahead. Don't miss a moment. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay with us. Thank you for standing for truth and justice. Where are you watching from? Let us know. The press conference was scheduled for 5 p.m., but by 4:15, the City Hall courtyard was already a hive of tension. Reporters from every major news network clustered behind velvet ropes, cameras primed, microphones angled toward the empty podium like soldiers at attention. The air was heavy with humidity and rumor. No one knew exactly what was coming, but they all sensed something seismic. Word had leaked earlier that afternoon. Mayor Ethan Reed had canceled every meeting, shut down his schedule, and summoned the press with a single, cryptic message. I have something urgent to say. You'll want to be here. Whispers turned to wildfire. Speculation surged online. Some said it was about the controversial life sentence handed down days earlier to a black mother named Angela Reed. Some suggested Ethan was stepping down. Others wondered if the two stories were connected. No one was ready for what was about to happen. At exactly 5 p.m., Ethan stepped up to the podium. No suit jacket, no American flag pin, no pre-written statement. Just a man, sleeves rolled, eyes tired, jaw clenched like a soldier walking into battle. The first flashbulb exploded, then another, then dozens. He didn't blink. He leaned into the microphone, voice calm but charged with purpose. Good evening. I stand before you today not just as your mayor, but as a husband, and a father, and a man who can no longer remain silent. A ripple of confusion swept through the crowd. The woman sentenced to life in prison this week for a nonviolent possession charge is my wife. Angela Reed is my wife. Gasps, audible and sharp. Reporters jolted forward, cameras surged. Social media exploded within seconds. The live stream from City Hall was already trending worldwide. For over a decade, we've kept our marriage private, not because we were ashamed, but because we wanted to protect our family from the spotlight. But now that silence is hurting the person I love most. Ethan's voice cracked, just slightly, but he held steady. Angela was arrested while carrying her elderly mother's heart medication in a bottle without a label. She has no record. She works 2 jobs. She raised 3 children. She volunteers. She cares. And Judge Gregory Hartman gave her life in prison. A stunned silence blanketed the courtyard. Not because of the crime, but because of who she is, because of the color of her skin, because this justice system is not broken. It is operating exactly the way it was designed to, and that design has always been stacked against people like my wife. The words hit like thunder. Reporters began yelling questions, but Ethan raised a hand, silencing the storm. I'm not here to protect a political image. I'm here to expose a lie that's been poisoning our city for far too long. I've reviewed Hartman's record. The numbers speak for themselves. 80% of his harshest sentences have gone to black and brown defendants. His history with white nationalist organizations is not speculation. It's documented. And now the woman I love is paying the price. Ethan paused, pulled a folded photo from his pocket and held it up for the cameras. This is my family. Angela, Jasmine, Tyler, Caleb. That is who Judge Hartman sentenced. Not a criminal, but a mother, a wife, a citizen. And I will fight for her with everything I have. He stepped back, and the press room erupted. Microphones were thrust forward. Dozens of questions shouted at once. When did you marry? Why keep it secret? What legal action are you taking? Is Judge Hartman being investigated? Is this the end of your political career? Ethan answered only one question before leaving the podium. My career is irrelevant. My wife's freedom is not. And neither is justice. He turned, walked off stage, and left a firestorm in his wake. Within 30 minutes, the city was on fire, not with flames, but with fury. News anchors scrambled to adjust coverage. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram exploded with hashtags, Justice for Angela, Fire Hartman. Mayor Reed Cable news hosts who had dismissed Angela's case earlier in the week now replayed the footage of her in shackles with a new lens, a lens of outrage, empathy, and shame. Civil rights organizations issued immediate statements. Protests that had begun small swelled into full-scale marches. By nightfall, the courthouse steps were flooded with people. Mothers, fathers, college students, nurses, ministers, construction workers. Some carried candles, others carried signs. Angela is all of us. Justice shouldn't depend on skin color. Hartman must go. Helicopters hovered above. Police formed barricades, but there was no violence, only volume. Anguish turned into action. Downtown intersections were shut down by human chains. A group of local pastors locked arms and prayed loudly in front of the courthouse entrance, demanding accountability. In one of the city's poorest neighborhoods, a mural of Angela was spray-painted overnight on a brick wall. The image showed her not in handcuffs, but with her arms outstretched, protecting her children beneath her. Below it, in blood-red paint, "She should be home." The next morning, the protest didn't stop. It multiplied. By 8 a.m., there were demonstrations in 6 parts of the city. High school students walked out of classrooms. Bus drivers refused routes to the courthouse. Hospital staff gathered outside their own buildings in silent solidarity. City Hall's phone lines crashed from the sheer volume of calls. Then came the clergy. Leaders from over 20 churches, synagogues, and mosques convened a press conference of their own, standing united on the courthouse steps. "We don't stand here as politicians," said Reverend Alicia Monroe, eyes blazing. "We stand here as moral witnesses, and we say no more. No more lives stolen by a system that disguises punishment as justice." Inside his home, Judge Hartman watched from his television. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted his coffee mug, but this time he spilled it. Reporters camped outside his gated estate, shouting questions he refused to answer. His official statement, released through a court spokesperson, was brief and cold. "The judge stands by his legal ruling and has no further comment at this time." But the city wasn't waiting for comment. It was demanding change. By the afternoon, national figures had joined the outcry. Congresswomen, civil rights lawyers, activists with millions of followers. Then came the video. A newly surfaced clip from 3 years ago showed Hartman chuckling in his chambers, muttering about how these inner-city cases are all the same. It ignited the crowd like gasoline on flame. The State Judicial Review Board announced it would open a formal investigation into Judge Hartman's conduct. Anonymous tips flooded their inbox. Former clerks, public defenders, even courtroom janitors who remembered jokes and comments that now, in the light of day, reeked of systemic rot. Inside the prison, Angela sat on her cot, unaware of the storm raging outside, until the guard brought a TV into the common room. And there he was, Ethan, standing behind that podium, telling the world the truth. Her eyes widened, her mouth trembled. Then came the footage of the protests, the murals, the signs, the women holding candles, the children marching with megaphones. And she broke. Her hands flew to her mouth. Tears streamed down her face, unstoppable, raw. Not from pain this time, but from hope. She was not alone. They were fighting for her, and maybe, just maybe, the world was finally listening. Angela Reed had been thrown in a cell for carrying her mother's medication. But when her husband stepped forward, when the people rose around her, her story became more than tragedy. It became a rallying cry, and the city would never be the same again. The courthouse clock had just struck 9 a.m. when Sofia Alvarez stormed through the double doors of the state appeals office, her heels clapping against the marble floor like gunshots in a silent war. Her leather briefcase was packed to bursting, and her expression was carved from stone. She didn't pause to greet anyone. She didn't need to. Everyone already knew who she was and what she was about to do. She marched straight to the front desk and slammed down a stack of manila folders, bound tight with red string. "I'm filing an emergency appeal," she said, her voice calm but thunderous, "on behalf of Angela Reed and 43 others who have been victims of systematic, racially motivated sentencing by Judge Gregory Hartman." Clerk blinked, stunned. 43? Sophia nodded. And counting. The room seemed to freeze. Within the hour, her motion hit the judicial network like a lightning strike. The petition wasn't just about Angela. It was a sweeping appeal attached to a dossier of damning evidence. Transcripts, sentencing records, statistical comparisons, and sworn affidavits. The 43 cases she submitted showed a clear, irrefutable pattern. Black and brown defendants sentenced up to 5 times longer than white defendants for the same offenses, many of them minor, nonviolent, or first-time charges. The media picked it up before lunch. The front page of every major outlet featured Sophia's motion in bold. Civil rights attorney files emergency appeal against Judge Hartman, cites racial bias in over 40 cases. Sophia didn't stop there. By afternoon, she had scheduled a live briefing on the courthouse steps. Cameras rolled as she stood firm behind a podium, hair pulled back, eyes blazing with righteous fire. This isn't just about one woman. This is about a system that allowed one man in a robe to quietly destroy lives for over a decade, without oversight, without consequence, and without anyone brave enough to stop him. That ends today. Behind her stood representatives from community organizations, churches, civil rights groups, and citizens who had stayed quiet for far too long. One of them was Marlon Davis, a former defendant who had once stood trembling in Hartman's courtroom for a marijuana possession charge. The white defendant before him walked free with a warning. Marlon was given 4 years. He stepped forward now, gripping the microphone with both hands. I lost everything because of that man. My job, my apartment, my daughter's trust. Now I finally know I wasn't alone. That night, the city boiled over. Neighborhood after neighborhood lit up with protests, not with rage, but with purpose. Thousands marched under banners that read, "Justice for the 43. Bias is a crime. Reform starts now." What had begun as scattered outrage had crystallized into a movement. Law students set up legal aid tents. Clergy members held all-night vigils. Barbershops, libraries, and community centers became hubs of strategy and solidarity. Angela's story had become the spark. Sophia's appeal was the fire. The pressure on the judicial system was unrelenting. Phone lines at the appeals court were jammed for 3 days straight. Email inboxes overflowed with statements from advocacy groups, former defendants, even jurors who had felt uneasy about Hartman's behavior, but never knew how deep it ran. At one point, a group of retired judges signed a public letter supporting Sophia's appeal, stating, "No individual should hold the gavel that weighs heavier on one skin color than another." City officials tried to stay neutral, but neutrality was no longer an option. You were either part of the silence or part of the resistance. Inside prison walls, the ripple effect reached Angela. The guards were no longer indifferent. They were watchful, cautious. Inmates whispered her name with reverence. Some passed her notes. Others offered quiet nods of solidarity. One morning, a cafeteria worker slipped her a folded napkin. Inside was a single line. "They're fighting for you. Don't stop fighting back." Angela tucked the note inside Jasmine's letter. Her fire was burning hotter than ever now. Meanwhile, Sophia worked around the clock. With her legal team camped inside a temporary office lined with case files and news clippings, she prepared for the appeals hearing like it was a war council. Dozens of volunteers sorted testimonies. Interns cross-checked sentencing records. Former Hartman defendants poured in by the hour, desperate to be heard. Each new name strengthened the case. Each story added another stone to the mountain of injustice. And at the center of it all, Angela's name remained the banner they marched under. The day before the hearing, the courthouse steps became a stage. A massive demonstration formed, stretching across 4 city blocks. Families, lawyers, teenagers, veterans, nurses, and teachers all came together, not with anger, but with a demand. A choir sang, "A change is gonna come." Children held signs that read, "My future shouldn't depend on the color of my skin. Judge fair or don't judge at all." And just before dusk, Sophia took the stage again. No script, no teleprompter, just truth. The law is supposed to be blind, but for too long it's been squinting at color. Tomorrow we give it back its vision. We demand better, not just for Angela, not just for the 43, but for every person who's ever walked into a courtroom and felt invisible. The crowd roared. Candles were lit, prayers were whispered, and somewhere in a tiny cell, Angela sat with her head held high, the photo of her children in one hand, and the letter from Jasmine in the other. The weight of injustice hadn't crushed her. It had forged her into something stronger. Tomorrow her name would echo in the halls of power. Tomorrow the system would be forced to look itself in the mirror. And for the first time in a long, long time, it wouldn't like what it saw. The morning of the appeals hearing arrived like a thunderclap. By 7 a.m., the line outside the courthouse stretched for nearly 3 blocks. People came dressed in black, not for mourning, but for solidarity. They held signs close to their chests. Justice for Angela, equality isn't optional, one voice, one fight. Local news stations parked satellite trucks along the sidewalks, anchoring live broadcasts as cameras rolled and whispers spread. By 8 a.m., courtroom 4A, usually half empty on any given Tuesday, was overflowing. Every bench was packed shoulder to shoulder. Reporters sat cross-legged on the floor. Law students stood along the walls scribbling into notepads with trembling hands. Even the overflow room, equipped with a live video feed, was at capacity. But it wasn't the crowd that made the air feel suffocating. It was the weight of anticipation, the sense that everything was about to shift, the moment when the law would either redeem itself or damn itself completely. At 8:30 sharp, the panel of 3 appellate judges filed into the room. Their black robes flowed like waves in a rising tide. In the center sat Judge Eleanor Whitmore, a woman known for her sharp intellect and unshakable poise. Her gray eyes scanned the courtroom like searchlights. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced. And with that, Sofia Alvarez rose to her feet. She stood tall behind the defense table, no notes in front of her, just a single binder and a mind sharpened like steel. She looked like a general in the middle of battle, and she was ready for war. "May it please the court," she began, voice steady, clear, and bold. "We are not here to ask for favors. We are here to demand justice that should have been delivered months ago. My client, Angela Reed, was sentenced to life in prison for a nonviolent possession charge. Her first offense, because she carried her mother's prescribed medication in an unmarked bottle. That should have been a ticket, at most a warning. Instead, it became a life sentence." She paused, letting the words settle like dust in the silence. "Your Honors," she continued, "this is not an isolated error. This is the product of a pattern, a long-standing, documented practice of racially biased sentencing by Judge Gregory Hartman. Today I will present to you video evidence, statistical breakdowns, sworn affidavits, and eyewitness testimony that will make that truth impossible to ignore." She gestured toward the screen set up beside the bench. The lights dimmed. First video played. Angela's sentencing. The footage showed her standing before Judge Hartman, pleading with dignity and composure. It showed her lawyer objecting to the excessive punishment. It showed Hartman's cold, detached delivery of the sentence. Life in prison, with no remorse, no hesitation, no mercy. The silence in the courtroom was broken only by the soft, muffled gasps from the gallery. Sofia pressed a button. A second video loaded, this time showing a white defendant who, only weeks earlier, had been caught with multiple prescription bottles under a false name. Judge Hartman gave him probation and community service. The difference was damning. She moved swiftly, page after page, chart after chart. Sofia presented a 5-year analysis. 82% of Hartman's harshest sentences had gone to minority defendants. On-screen graphs rose like dark mountains of proof. Then came the testimonies. A former court clerk who described Hartman's private jokes about those kinds of people always lying. A public defender who detailed how Hartman routinely interrupted black defendants, cutting their testimony short. A juror who recalled Hartman's face souring whenever a defendant's skin wasn't white. And then, Sofia called her final witness. "Your Honors," she said, her voice softening, "I would now like to call to the stand Mrs. Lorraine Jackson, Angela Reed's mother." A hush fell over the room. From the gallery, an elderly woman rose slowly. Her gray curls framed a tired face. Her hands shook slightly as she took the oath and approached the witness stand. Sofia guided her gently. "Mrs. Jackson," she said, "can you please tell the court about the medication in question?" Lorraine cleared her throat, her voice fragile but steady. "I suffer from chronic heart failure," she began. "That medicine, it keeps me alive. Angela was just bringing it home to me. I had put it in an unmarked bottle because my old hands couldn't open the childproof caps anymore. She offered to drive it over after her night shift." She paused, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "She wasn't selling it. She wasn't hiding it. She was helping me, helping her children. That's all she ever does. My Angela's the strongest woman I know. And now she's locked away like some kind of monster." Gasps rippled through the room. A few people wiped tears from their eyes. Even Judge Whitmore leaned forward, her fingers steepled in front of her mouth. "Thank you, Mrs. Jackson," Sofia said gently. "No further questions." As Lorraine stepped down, she passed by the defense table and touched Sophia's hand with trembling fingers. "You bring my baby home," she whispered. Sophia nodded once. "I will." Outside the courthouse, a crowd of hundreds had gathered, following every word via live stream on a massive screen. They cheered, they cried, they fell into silence at every revelation. Church bells rang at noon in solidarity. In classrooms, students watched from laptops. In barbershops, people stopped mid-cut. It was more than a trial now. It was a reckoning. Back in the courtroom, Sophia delivered her closing argument. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Angela Reed is not a number. She is not a case file. She is a mother, a daughter, a citizen. She is the embodiment of everything this system is supposed to protect. Instead, it punished her for being black, for being poor, for trusting a system that failed her. She turned, locking eyes with the panel. "Your Honors, this appeal is not only a chance to right one wrong, it is a chance to begin healing a system that has bled our communities dry for far too long. Don't let this courtroom become another monument to injustice. Let it be the moment when justice remembered its purpose." She stepped back. The courtroom held its breath. Judge Whitmore nodded slowly. "The court will recess to deliberate. A ruling will be delivered shortly." The gavel struck once, and the room exhaled. People spilled into the hallways, buzzing, tense, emotional. Angela's family huddled together. Her mother clutched Jasmine's hand. Tyler sat on the bench, biting his lip, his legs swinging. Sophia stepped outside, leaned against the wall, and closed her eyes. She had delivered everything she had. Now it was up to the court. Inside the deliberation room, the three judges pored over the evidence. Judge Whitmore tapped her pen once, then twice. Her voice, low and clear, broke the silence. "We don't just have evidence of bias. We have a blueprint of systemic failure. And it ends today." Back in courtroom 4A, the people returned to their seats. The courtroom was silent. So silent, in fact, that you could hear the sound of a single camera shutter click in the back row. Every eye was fixed on the bench. Every breath was held like it might shatter the moment. The weight of weeks of injustice, protest, investigation, truth-telling, and relentless hope had all come to this. And now, as Judge Eleanor Whitmore lifted the verdict sheet in her hands, the air became electric. Angela Reed stood in her prison-issued clothing, shoulders squared, eyes unwavering. She had spent the last 4 weeks shackled behind walls that sought to erase her. But she stood here now, in open court, flanked by her attorney, Sophia Alvarez, waiting to hear if the system that had failed her once would have the courage to make it right. Judge Whitmore's voice rang out with firm finality. "After thorough review of the original sentencing, presented evidence, and new testimony, this court finds the ruling in the case of the state versus Angela Reed to be not only unjust, but unconstitutional." A stunned hush. "We hereby vacate the sentence in full. Angela Reed is free to go, effective immediately." And just like that, the dam broke. Sophia dropped her pen, overcome. Angela gasped, staggering back slightly as tears welled in her eyes, too stunned to speak. Her hands flew to her mouth, trembling. The judge continued, her voice unwavering. "Furthermore, the court recommends an emergency review of all cases presided over by Judge Gregory Hartman. Effective today, he is suspended from the bench pending formal investigation for judicial misconduct, racial bias, and abuse of power." The gallery erupted. Gasps, cheers, applause that thundered through the walls. And Angela, she stood frozen, overwhelmed, until she felt the warm, familiar hands of her daughter Jasmine, suddenly running down the aisle, sobbing and shouting, "Mom!" Tyler was right behind her, arms outstretched. Caleb trailed with a tiny scream of joy as their grandmother stumbled to her feet in tears. Angela dropped to her knees, catching all 3 of her babies in her arms as they barreled into her. Jasmine cried into her chest. Tyler held her hand like a lifeline. Caleb refused to let go of her neck. It was no longer a courtroom. It was a miracle. Camera flashes burst like fireworks as the family clung to one another. Angela kissed each of their foreheads, eyes closed, whispering over and over again, "I'm here. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Outside the courthouse, the crowd that had gathered for hours under the sun holding signs, chanting songs, praying in circles, was watching the live stream on the massive digital screen set up on the lawn. And the moment Judge Whitmore said those words, "Angela Reed is free to go," the lawn exploded. People screamed. Strangers hugged. Some dropped to their knees, sobbing in joy. Others threw their fists in the air. Dozens of churchgoers fell into spontaneous gospel hymns. A line of children holding handmade signs that said, "Free Angela," jumped up and down chanting, "She's free! She's free! She's free!" The reporters on site struggled to keep up. One anchor dropped her notes entirely and turned to the camera. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have just witnessed one of the most historic reversals of injustice in this state's history." The courthouse doors finally opened and Angela stepped into the sunlight. The crowd roared. She was no longer in orange. Someone had handed her a simple white blouse and jeans. Her hair was loose. Her face was glowing with tears and disbelief and strength. Her family followed, Jasmine still holding her hand, Caleb on her hip, Tyler walking proudly beside her. Behind them, Sofia Alvarez emerged to thunderous applause, holding up the folder of court documents like a trophy. The cameras swarmed them. Angela was asked question after question, microphones shoved into her path. But she stopped, took a breath, and turned toward the crowd. "I went into that prison thinking the world had forgotten me," she said, her voice hoarse but powerful. "But you didn't forget. You fought. You marched. You spoke my name when I couldn't speak for myself." She looked at her children. "They tried to take me away from my babies. They tried to break me. But I'm still here, and I'm not just walking out for me. I'm walking out for every woman, every mother, every soul who's been thrown away by a system that refuses to see us." Tears streamed down faces in the crowd. She stepped down the courthouse steps, sunlight bathing her face, and as she walked through the crowd, people reached out to touch her shoulder, to hold her hand, to say thank you. Jasmine kept glancing up at her mother like she couldn't believe she was real, and the city, so long divided, felt whole for a moment. Inside the courthouse, in a chamber stripped of its usual calm, Judge Gregory Hartman sat alone at his desk, watching the news feed. His hands were trembling. The suspension notice had arrived just minutes after the ruling. The Judicial Conduct Board had delivered it personally. His name was on every news ticker in the nation. His past affiliations, his sentencing disparities, his remarks. All of it had come into the light, and the robe he once wore with arrogance and impunity now sat folded on the edge of his desk. No longer a symbol of power, but of disgrace. Outside, the people chanted one word: justice, justice, justice. That evening, the city held its breath as the sun dipped below the horizon. But instead of descending into silence, it exploded into celebration. Angela's old neighborhood held a block party in her honor. Local musicians played. Barbers offered free cuts. Kids painted murals on brick walls, Angela with her fist raised, surrounded by light. In front of City Hall, Mayor Ethan Reed gave a televised statement. "Today, my wife came home, but more importantly, justice came home. Let this be the beginning, not the end of reform." He stepped aside, letting Angela speak. She didn't speak long. She didn't have to. "I was just one, but we are many. Let's keep fighting." Later that night, back in the house that had waited patiently for her return, Angela tucked Caleb into bed. Tyler had fallen asleep with his head on her lap during movie night. Jasmine sat on the couch, curled up against her side. The news still played in the background, but Angela wasn't watching anymore. She was looking at her children, holding them, breathing them in. Alive. Home. Free. Upstairs, a letter sat on her nightstand, the same one Jasmine had sent her in prison. "We miss you, Mommy. Please come home soon." Angela placed her hand on it, whispering, "I kept my promise, baby. I came home." And somewhere in the distance, the sound of a city finally waking up to its own conscience echoed through the streets. Justice had not just been served, it had been reclaimed. And it all began with one woman who refused to be silenced, one family who refused to give up, and a city that at last chose truth over tradition. Angela Reed was free, but her fight lit a fire that would never be put out. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference. The banner behind the podium read in bold white letters, "Justice for all. A new dawn begins." Angela Reed stood at the center of the open-air stage in front of City Hall, the morning sun casting a golden glow across her face. Her poise was unmistakable, her presence magnetic. The woman who had once stood in chains, sentenced to life for a crime she didn't commit, now stood tall before a sea of supporters, not as a victim, but as a leader of change. To her left stood Mayor Ethan Reed, no longer hiding their marriage, but holding her hand proudly as the crowd of hundreds cheered them on. Behind them, a newly unveiled banner stretched across the building, Justice for All Initiative, founded by Angela and Ethan Reed. It had only been 4 months since Angela had walked free, but what followed was a whirlwind of transformation. Rather than retreat quietly into the background, Angela stepped forward with purpose. She and Ethan had poured every resource, every connection, and every ounce of pain and resilience into the creation of the Justice for All Initiative, a movement that would not just fight wrongful convictions, but challenge the deep systemic roots that allowed injustice to thrive. They started with one goal: review every case sentenced under Judge Hartman's gavel. With the cooperation of the District Attorney's Office and a growing team of attorneys, activists, and data scientists, they launched a citywide audit. And the results were staggering. 43 cases were immediately flagged. Within weeks, the number had grown to 78. Each file revealed another person, many of them poor, many of them people of color, who had been handed disproportionately harsh sentences. Now, months later, dozens of these individuals were walking free, families reunited, tears shed in courtrooms that had once been grounds of despair now became sanctuaries of redemption. Angela stood before the crowd, microphone in hand, her voice firm yet intimate, like she was speaking to each heart in the audience individually. "I was one woman, one case, one mother," she began, "and I could have come out of that cell and just gone home. I could have chosen peace over battle. But how could I rest knowing that the cell I left behind would simply be filled with the next person the system failed?" The crowd murmured in agreement, many wiping away tears. "Justice is not just about overturning one verdict," she continued, her voice rising. "It's about overturning a system that allows injustice to hide in plain sight. It's about breaking a cycle so deep that we no longer even question its cruelty." She looked out over the crowd, families holding signs, lawyers standing shoulder to shoulder with former inmates, students recording every word, hoping this speech would be the beginning of their own fight for change. Justice isn't about winning a case. It's about repairing what was broken. And it's going to take every single one of us, not just lawyers and judges, but parents and teachers, journalists and neighbors. This isn't my fight anymore. It's our mission. Thunderous applause erupted. The press cameras zoomed in as Angela held up a small photograph, one of her in prison, holding Jasmine's handwritten letter against her chest. "This was my strength," she said softly, "and now it will be the strength for every man and woman still waiting for the system to see them." Ethan stepped beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "From this day forward," he added, "we don't hide, we don't compromise, and we don't stop until every voice is heard and every injustice is brought into the light." The Justice for All initiative grew fast. Cities sought help, law schools joined, and prosecutors reopened old cases. Angela became a national voice, not of pain, but of purpose. Sophia led a team exposing biased judges. Reform spread. But Angela knew true justice began at home. That night, the Reed family shared dinner. Laughter, love, no more hiding. Angela looked at them and said, "We're not hiding anymore. We're not running. We lead now." Once silenced, she now led a movement, turning injustice into lasting change.